Merry Christmas, you filthy animal. And a Happy New Year. Welcome to another episode of Round the Clock Frights, Boils and Ghouls. My name is Josh, and today we're going to be talking about one of the most renowned horror remakes of all time. Now, before we get into today's topic, I just have to ask you guys just one thing. Would any of you care for some delicious and nutritious Christmas cookies? Actually, after viewing 2006's Black Christmas, I doubt any of you would want anything to do with Christmas cookies. And with that, let's talk about today's film. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the less awful remake of 1974's Black Christmas, the 2006 film Black Christmas, directed by Glenn Morgan, who was also responsible for some of the Final Destination films. Now, before I get into the meat of this review, I just have to say, this film, even before I watched it, it was already giving me way more trouble than it was probably worth, because I went to a local used movie store called Zia Records, and I wanted to pick up a DVD copy of this thing just so I could put it on the table and show it off for all of you nice people. Oh, by the way, I did put some perennial Christmas horror movies on the table here. Krampus, the original Black Christmas, and Gremlins. Anyway, so I was at Zia Records and I could not find a copy of this thing. So I waited in line to ask the cashier if they could find me a copy, maybe at another location, and I just noticed the people in front of me were buying all these other Christmas classics. Like, one guy had a DVD copy of Home Alone, another one pretty sure had a copy of It's a Wonderful Life, and I was the one jackass in the line who wanted to get a DVD copy of the 2006 remake of Black Christmas, because that's a film that every family should watch this time of year. The 2006 remake of Black Christmas. It is destined to become a beloved holiday classic. But yeah, like a like an embarrassed child, I kind of waddled over to the register and asked the woman, and she said the only location in the United States that carried a copy was in Las Vegas. So she was very nice. She was nice enough to have a copy transferred over from the Vegas location. And I actually realized, looking at the receipt later, that they had ordered me the 2019 Black Christmas, released by Blumhouse Productions. Now, all of you know my thoughts on the 2019 Black Christmas. If you have not, we did release that last year, right around the time that it was released in theaters, actually. So be sure to check that out. I can actually leave a link for that review down in the description there. But yes, I could not find a copy of this thing, and I looked everywhere. I even looked on Amazon, and they had it for like, I think $31 new. So I wasn't gonna waste money on a movie that I probably wasn't going to like. It would have been a huge waste of time and effort. So I searched the internet high and low, and I finally just decided to rent it digitally on Amazon Prime. That's what I did. It cost me about $4. Was it worth it? Well, I can certainly say this. The 2006 remake of Black Christmas is not as horrendous as last year's Black Christmas. At least this film had no political agenda. The remake that came out last year, it was honestly, God, it was very patronizing, it was very condescending. It felt like the director's sole purpose was just to shove her own personal views in audiences' faces, which was very irritating. It felt like one long, angry Twitter rant. That's what the 2019 Black Christmas felt like, and it was just very poorly made. It was just a chore to sit through. Now, I don't know if it's because I'm in a more forgiving mood this time of year, but let me just say this. The 2006 remake of Black Christmas actually did have some worthwhile things in it. Believe it or not, it actually did have some merit, which is utterly surprising, because I've been hearing for many years about how this is one of the worst horror remakes of all time, but honestly, comparing it to the 2019 version, it's leagues better than that one. It's like, honestly, it's like comparing how am I gonna put this? It's like comparing two pieces of trash. You know, one piece of trash might still be more intact, you know, it might be cleaner, and you're comparing that to, say, a used napkin covered in spit and grime. And anyway, both of these films aren't necessarily the best, but I'm going to get into some of the things that I liked about the 2006 Black Christmas, and of course some of the things I didn't like. Now, right off the bat, I just have to say that I actually did some research on this movie, and apparently the director Glenn Morgan actually didn't want to make it such a gory film. But he was forced to make it gory by none other than the Weinstein brothers. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they're this filmmaking duo who were responsible for a lot of popular films back in the day. Harvey Weinstein, you may or may not heard of him. He got into some trouble recently, but they essentially grabbed the director, by the neck and forced him to insert more gory scenes in this movie. But director Glenn Morgan apparently wanted it to be a bit more atmospheric. He wanted it to be more along the lines of the original Black Christmas. And this is where I have to begin comparing the two films. Because the original Black Christmas, the reason that movie was so effective and so terrifying was because the killer in that movie was random. Like Michael Myers, he didn't have any motivation. He randomly snuck into this sorority sister's house, and he hid up in their attic, and he proceeded to kill them off one by one. But, oh, sorry, Krampus. But he proceeded to kill them off one by one. There was no motive. And there was such an aura of mystery to that film. You never got a good look at the killer's face. Whereas in the 2006 remake of Black Christmas, you get this incredibly disgusting backstory of this killer, whose name is Billy. And I mean, this film was like over 15 years old, but it turns out that the killer in this movie actually has a sister. So there ends up being two killers in this movie. This wonderful gem of a movie. So anyway, the plot is that this guy escapes on Christmas. He has been locked up in a mental asylum, and a dumbass employee at the asylum decides to treat him with some chicken and candy canes. And I don't know about you, but I don't think a mental asylum would give inmates candy canes, because it seems as if that could be used as a potential weapon, which of course that turns out to be the case. Billy actually licks the candy cane, or he sucks on it until it is very sharp, and he can use it as a weapon to stab the security guard in the neck. And then he escapes the mental asylum by switching out with this dude who is there dressed as Santa Claus, I guess visiting the children's ward. And I just have to say, this movie is so bizarre and bonkers. Like, there are multiple scenes in this movie that are just jaw-dropping in how bizarre they are. This is a weird movie. But the rest of the plot is pretty much like the original. I'm going to go into certain spoilers, but he ends up going back to the sorority house in which he lived as a little boy, and he decides to pick off the sorority sisters one by one. None of them are as appealing to watch as the actors in the original movie. There's no Olivia Hussey in this movie. There's certainly no Margot Kidder. All the main characters in this movie are bland as hell. Like many slasher movies of the 2000s and late 90s, these girls are meant to look pretty and get killed off in brutal ways. They're essentially a group of Victoria's Secret models who are just there to be axed off or stabbed in the head with an ice skate. Yeah, that happens to one of the characters. Now, I mentioned earlier that this film had some gory sequences, but I have to get into the killer's backstory because it ends in such a disgusting fashion that I almost wanted to puke my brains out. And I don't say that lightly because I've seen hundreds of horror movies, but we learned that Billy, the killer, grew up in a house with a psychotic mom who ended up killing his biological father, and she ended up bringing her redneck boyfriend in, and they proceeded to lock the little boy in their attic for decades. He essentially grows up in this attic, and the mom wants to conceive a new child with her redneck boyfriend, and what happens is that she ends up having sex with her own son, presumably when he is still a teenager. And if you're still with me at this point, kudos, because it was at this point that I contemplated turning the movie off, because there's a difference between being entertainingly gory and just downright unpleasant and nasty. it was borderline torture porn because essentially Billy, as a little boy, murders his mother and her lover. He drags his mother's corpse to the kitchen, and what does he do? He grabs like, oh my god, he grabs the oh my god, what are they called? He grabs like the utensils that you buy to make Christmas cookies, and he places them on his mother's bare flesh, and he essentially carves out bits of her flesh in the shape of Christmas cookies. He bakes them in the oven, and then he munches on them with great fervor. We actually see a close up of him just tearing into these flesh Christmas cookies that he made from his mother. And yeah, I can just see Harvey Weinstein's reaction to the scene, him being all satisfied at how disgusting this movie is, and yes, I just like to live out my violent fantasies. I love to see mothers getting killed and turned into Christmas treats. Yes, I'm Harvey Weinstein, and this is what I want out of my Christmas horror movies. Yeah, that's the 2006 Black Christmas remake. Okay, so some of the other gory bits in this movie, I enjoyed when the house mother, played by Andrea Martin, who was in the original movie, had an icicle fall through her eye, which I think was actually a reference to Bob Clark's A Christmas Story. Bob Clark was the director of the original film, and he served as one of the executive producers in this movie. And I think having an icicle fall into a character's eye was a reference to A Christmas Story, because in that movie, the mother tells Ralphie that icicles have been known to kill people. I think that was a little Easter egg. I thought that was neat. And another character gets her head bashed in with an ice skate, which was kind of amusing. Another character gets her eyeball, plucked out of her skull, because both Billy and his psychotic sister Agnes have an obsession with eyeballs for some reason. This movie does have some gory highlights, like particularly at the end when two characters stumble upon the two killers in the attic, and they've set up this horrific Christmas display where they've taken the decapitated heads of their victims and they've used them to basically create this or to decorate this Christmas tree. That was horrific, but in kind of a neat way, I guess. You know what? You can call me weird all you want. I will say this about this movie: it does go there. Like, it is incredibly over the top and cartoonish at times, but there is some pleasure to be had, at least for us horror fans, and how bizarre it is. Now, of course, it doesn't even compare to the original film. In fact, I want to compare the phone call scenes in these two movies. So in the original film, there's a very famous scene where the sorority sisters are called by the mysterious killer, and he starts spitting expletives, over the phone. He starts speaking expletives, and you just see these close-ups of the sorority sisters, and they look utterly terrified. In this movie, they do the phone call scene, but this time some of the girls are wearing like these low-cut shirts to show off their cleavage, and when it shows all of them, like hovering around the phone listening to this killer talking to them in this really creepy voice, all you're focusing on is their cleavage. You're not focused on the intensity of the moment. There's no atmosphere in this scene. It is just a bunch of gorgeous-looking women listening to a phone call. You're not really paying attention to how horrific the scene is. You're just paying attention to how gorgeous these girls are. Now, some positives. This film does have some visual flair, at least compared to the 2019 film. The 2019 remake had little to no atmosphere. Certain scenes were overly lit. There just wasn't much visual flair in the 2019 remake, but this film has atmosphere to spare. I will give it that. A lot of reds and greens. Like the director, there will be certain scenes where a character will be wandering through a dark space and the background will be lit with all these reds and greens, and characters' faces will often be like covered in shadows, and the cinematography was actually above average, which I can say is a definite plus when it comes to this movie. But then there are just some really stupid plot holes in this movie. Like, okay, would college students willingly move into a house where a series of gruesome murders definitely took place? That just seems a little bit odd to me. Like, what college would willingly build a sorority house where this horrific murder took place? That is just so baffling to me. And also, there's a scene early on in the movie that takes place in the mental asylum where the fake Santa dude is walking down a hallway and he's hit on by this really horny nurse, which is a little bit unprofessional, but whatever. A horror movie's got a horror movie, and they're often filled with horny as fuck characters who want to do nothing but sleep around, and yeah, this movie definitely has that. So there were plot holes like that, and apparently there were like 4 different endings to this movie, and the one that they went with, it's a second climax, because you have the climax where they confront Agnes and Billy in the attic, and they set the house on fire, and you assume that the killers didn't make it out alive. But of course, the 2 survivors, make it to the hospital, and Billy and Agnes confront them there. And I don't know, the ending that they eventually went with, I mean, I guess it was kind of satisfying, but it just made the movie drag on a little bit longer. And I don't know, I thought they could have condensed the runtime just a little bit more. But yes, what are my overall thoughts on the movie? Obviously, it pales in comparison to the original. I mean, the original is a horror classic, and it touched upon certain themes that most horror films wouldn't dare touch upon. Olivia Hussey is contemplating getting an abortion in that movie, and it gives the film a little bit more depth. This film doesn't have anything like that. It is just a freak show, but it can be at times kind of an entertaining freak show. It's certainly not as horrendous as other horror remakes we got in the 2000s. Like, remember the PG-13 remake of Prom Night? That was essentially bloodless and dull and boring. This film at least keeps your attention with how weird it is. Would I recommend watching it? I mean, definitely watch this over the 2019 remake. That is for damn certain. Stay far, far away from the 2019 film. I cannot stress that enough. But yes, guys, what are your thoughts on the 2006 Black Christmas remake? I will say it is the less awful one, the less awful remake, so I'll give it that. And like I said, it does have its moments. And I mean, there are some other Christmas horror films out there. We have a lot to choose from. There are 3 Christmas horror movies right here, as a matter of fact. I'd love to know what some of your favorite Christmas horror movies are. Leave your picks down below in the comments. And I mean, it's Christmas time, and I know 2020 has been a dumpster fire. It has been a terrible year for a lot of people, but I want this to be a safe zone for you guys. I want you to come here as horror fans, and I want us to, be there for one another. So yes, if you want to leave, any other comments down below, please feel free to do so. If you like this, please subscribe to our channel, Round the Clock Frights. We will be bringing you some more horrific content weekly. And as far as what we're going to do next, I mean, next week, God, it is Christmas already. It's really kind of snuck up on us this year. So we're probably going to do one more Christmas review for you guys, but we're going to have to narrow down some choices here. But yes, guys, I hope you're having a safe, nice holiday. And as always, stay scary, boils and ghouls. And whatever you do, do not eat Christmas cookies made out of human flesh. Unless you're Jeffrey Dahmer. Yeah. Because Christmas and Jeffrey Dahmer just go hand in hand. Anyway, guys, thank you so much again. Again, if you liked what you saw, please subscribe and take care. And have a very scary Christmas. See you later, guys.